All right, so today we have a list of things that we want to kind of pull together and talk about, and it's mostly in prep for people participating in the Open. But before we jump into that, we kind of wanted to talk about what the Open looks like this year and how different it is and what that means for a lot of athletes doing it. You know, on the high level, it's a stepping stone to move on to other avenues in the sport at semifinals, in-person qualifiers. But then the opposite side of that, when they cut out quarterfinals, it leaves a lot of athletes kind of unsure, like, where do we go with this? And like, why is this important to pursue? So let's talk about some thoughts there and what the new changes would look like.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are that just like the Open structure changing this year means that every person has to individually decide what they want to get out of it. Because it's when there was top 10%, there was a huge group of people that are at like the non-professional level of the sport that had something real and tangible to shoot for in the Open. If you don't have that now, it's like, okay, well, what are you trying to do in the Open? Are you trying to get better as an athlete? Are you trying to use it as a practice to get better at qualifiers? Are you trying to support the sport? Are you trying to be part of the community? And I think like anytime any competition is discussed, there has to be a why if it's going to be important to you. And I think this year there's a little bit more reflection people need to have before they, you know, sign up and commit their full effort into it. They got to kind of know, like, what is it about it? You know, for you guys, it's different than maybe some just audience people watching.
We have in years past, I've always just made a blanket recommendation for all of the athletes that I coach that are CrossFitters, and I coach some people outside of the sport, but for everybody just to do the Open, like it's a, you know, mandatory participation type thing. I think it's something that in the past has always been like, okay, you can move on to quarterfinal. Pretty much everyone I coach could move on to quarterfinals. It's an opportunity to, you know, to challenge yourself, to have something to narrow your focus towards. But now I'm not sure that for everybody that I coach that I'm going to be like, hey, this is what you need to do. There are so many other competitive avenues.
Yeah, I think it's important to, number one, do your research, because the Open, while the structure may not have changed, we don't really, from what we know, it hasn't changed, but who knows what's going to happen. Yeah. But the places you can go from it have changed a lot. So there's the top 1%, right, for the Open division, top 2% for Masters. But then there's all these in-person events that the Open will qualify you for that. So you can look into that. What do I need to do? How high do I need to rank in order to qualify for those events? There's just do your research, because there's a lot of rules. For teams, there's different rules, and I would just prepare yourself before the Open starts and decide what you want to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it leads to the Community Cup as well. There's other things that CrossFit's trying to, I think they realized after changing, moving from 10% to 25% to 1%, they're like, wow, we're going to lose a lot of people that have interest in normally doing this, that want to like pursue like a next stage. So they come up with things like the Community Cup that still has like other competitive avenues that's going to feel like a quarterfinals based on what they've been saying. Like it's going to look like a series of workouts released throughout a week that'll be done like a gym format. So, but that's months from now. So, you know, I think you have to participate to be a part of that in the Open. So that's kind of like a barrier to entry. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the point is like, because it's changed so much, you have to ask some deeper questions on why it's important to me in the first place to sign up for this. Do I want to sign up for it? Am I just going to do it? And like, what's my level of participation? And, you know, like I'm of the opinion that, you know, I'm going to do the Masters. So like, that's obviously the hook for me, but I have a lot of athletes that, you know, they don't have a shot at 1%, and that's okay. But for them, it's still this global test that no one else has really matched in a sense of like, world comparison of, you know, like a test of CrossFit. And I think it's still something that's super fun for them to do, to still go back, and assuming there's going to be some repeats or just like an annual kind of repeat of how much better am I at these styles of workouts is fun to test on an annual basis against a really large body of people.
I swear I saw that there's going to be a repeat, so that, you know, that remeasurement or that retest is going to be there. I think I saw that.
I mean, it was
week.
In every Open until like 2 years ago, I feel like. There was always a repeat, right?
Which made sense, because when they cut it down to 3,
yeah,
I mean, it doesn't make that much sense to repeat a test.
Yeah, I would say, and like this is kind of one of the frustrations of just our whole, not just CrossFit, but just like the sport in general, is like, I found out last week there was a sanctional that popped up, and the qualifier,
guys.
Yeah, and it would like popped up, and then the qualifier was like the week before Wadapalooza, like 2 weeks before
NorCal?
NorCal.
Yeah. Dias qualified.
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike and I got a couple guys qualified.
Yeah. And so like this information is coming out almost in real time. So you
Yeah.
don't really have the time to plan and orchestrate ahead of time. So I'd say like if you're interested in the sport at all, like you want to keep doing competitive fitness, whether that looks like High Rocks or World Fitness Project or the CrossFit Games or Wadapalooza or Fittest of the Coast, like at any level, it might make sense to give yourself a backup plan to do the Open no matter what, because you might find out in May that the qualifier for a competition you want to go to was the Open.
Yeah.
And if you just made the choice not to do it, for whatever reason, it can almost bite you in the ass. So I feel like if you're an athlete, athletic-minded person, as long as it's not going to conflict and take away the fun and the planning of your year, even if you jump into it and you're just like, hey, I'm going to do it one and done to be part of the community, just like as a normal workout in my week and not take it as seriously as I used to, I might just give like a little bit more of a nudge. I am biased because I want the CrossFit Games and the sport and the whole infrastructure to get better. And I feel like if people don't sign up, it puts everybody, athletes, coaches, business owners, whatever, puts us all at risk. So I have a bias there, listen to that, but I really do think there's a justifiable reason that if you are an athlete in the space, it does make sense to do for whatever you plan to do in the year, because we just don't know what's coming and what they'll mandate, right? Like if a competition makes a partnership with CrossFit in the future, they might have to use the Open. So
yeah, they might put rules in place that say it doesn't matter where you finished in the Open, but you have to have participated in the Open this year.
Yeah, whatever.
I think that's
it
the
is.
case for for many of the semifinals, the live in-person semifinals that have their own qualifier. There's a stipulation that if you want to qualify for the CrossFit Games, that you had to have participated in the Open no matter what. So even if someone was thinking that they were going to, like to Mia's point, do your research, if they were going to circumvent the Open and just do the qualifier for this one event, potentially try and take the game spot, and then they would get away with not doing the Open, that's out. Like there are none that will allow you to do that.
Yeah. I think this kind of segues into point two is this point two about the leaderboard?
Can
a little
I say
bit,
one
yeah.
more thing?
The value of putting your name on a leaderboard and actually having some skin in the game.
I guess not me. Yeah. She said, can I say one more thing? And you started talking.
sorry.
It's okay.
Guess not.
I was going to say, if we think way back to, I don't know, 3 or 4 iterations of CrossFit ago, when was the last regionals? Like 2018?
Yeah.
2017?
Yeah.
2018. So back then, I remember people being so excited to do the Open, and most people weren't going anywhere, right?
Yep.
Like there was no quarterfinals. So your top, 40 made regionals or something?
Yeah,
from
it went like 60, 48.
It was
40,
a very
I think.
small amount of people, but people's rankings in the Open were very important to them and improving that year to year. So I know that there's been a lot of changes, and the introduction of quarterfinals was cool because it allowed that next like tangible step in competition. But I do think that there still is that value of if it's important to you to use that year by year test to. There was a time where it was important, right?
Yeah, yes,
even if it wasn't going to qualify you to something.
And I think there's still people that are important. Like, I don't want to say this in like a mean way, but there's people that are looking at their CrossFit season in the Open as like a participation thing. Like they get a badge for having done 12 straight. And it really is a very hard test of fitness over the course of 3
For
weeks.
sure. It
no
can totally
matter
be
what.
your like annual challenge. And
Yeah.
I think that that's super cool and important.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are, I guess, our pitches for kind of doing it, setting expectations. I think it's important to go through your process either with yourself or with your coach and figure it out. But probably does make sense to just
So next one I
sign
have
up and
was,
do.
what is the value of actually having your name on a leaderboard? So for those that are listening, they're like, yeah, well, I mean, I just do the workouts in my gym. I don't actually have to sign up. So like, let's talk about like why that would even be important. And that goes a little bit with like the sign up and support of CrossFit itself. But I think like, what do you get personally out of actually having your name on that leaderboard?
I think it depends on your goals. I think there's 2 arguments to it. If it is purely a for fun thing and you have a reason that you do not want to sign up for it, I don't necessarily have anything against that. But if you are saying that I am competing and my goal is to rank as high as possible, and next year I want to rank as high as possible, you can't really do that without totally buying in, right?
Yes.
being physically on the leaderboard. So
yeah, the pressure's different. Like now you have accountability. You signed up, you paid for this, and like your name's out there, and like that creates a different set of stressors that, you know, you show up and like 3, 2, 1, go, you know, like, all right, well, this is going to be measured and stacked and compared. And like for some people, no, they don't need that in their life. And I totally support that. And they go to the gym just to exercise. But for a lot of people, that's what makes it fun and exciting. And that's like the play that is involved in doing these types of like fitness activities, is a little bit of pressure with competition involved.
I think that the best part of competition is that it has the potential to make you really uncomfortable, and that real sense of anxiety and nervousness and pressure and insecurity almost always pulls the best out of people. If it doesn't pull the best out of you and you kind of crumble under that anxiety, even though that sucks and it does not feel good, it's usually a really good learning opportunity to become better as a person facing adversity or whatever.
And the only way to get better at dealing with that is to put yourself into the uncomfortable situation over and over and over until you figure out ways to manage that. And that's what I was going to say is there's plenty of people every year who say, you know, oh, had I submitted my scores, I would have been this place. Yep. But the reality is, as soon as you sign up and as soon as there's pressure attached to it, your placing is going to be different than it would have been if you were just doing it on your own where there was a low pressure environment. There's plenty of people that I've worked with that are like, yeah, you know, they're 34, aging into masters to 35. And they're like, yeah, I would have won the age group qualifier. Cool. Let's see you do it next year. And the next year they don't, you know, they're not even close to that finish because pressure and all of that changes the way people perform.
It's not even just they perform, it changes your actions.
Yeah,
you got to wait for the real
it.
announcement. You got to look through all of the standards. You got to make sure that you're at a gym doing it. I feel like the tendency that
you have to lose sleep the night before.
Yes.
Yeah, held accountable to actual standards in person.
Exactly.
Kind of doing it on your own and saying after the fact, well, I got around this score.
Yeah, and you're not playing the
around.
game. Yeah,
around this score.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but
I think I was like 10 rounds.
Like 9 or 10 rounds, probably definitely 10. Probably closer to 10.
Yeah, so I think that, and your people around you will hold you more accountable if you're on the leaderboard. Because if you're just like, oh, I'm not signed up, I'm going to do it at my house, no one cares. But if you're like, hey, I'm signed up and I'm going to do it at my house, people are like, well, why aren't you doing it here with us? Like, what's going on? Or where's your video? We want to see it, right? Like I know there's already
I'm scared, okay?
Yeah. There's already slippery standards in the open. So actually signing up at least makes it like you're doing the thing. Like you signed up for the damn thing and you're doing it. You're trying to abide by the rules as best as you can. Like, so I think it's kind of mandatory if you're calling yourself an athlete in this thing to sign up.
And does it even matter where you would have finished if you're not on the leaderboard because you're not on the damn leaderboard?
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't matter.
You screenshot it and just go put a little
put your own name on there. Great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, this goes back a little bit, but talking about like expectations based on that. So if you're choosing to compete and put your name on the leaderboard, with it being changed to like 1%, have you had conversations with people that heard that but didn't really put it together on what that means? Like I've had conversations with athletes that were like, yeah, I guess I'll pursue the 1%. And I'm like, cool, what'd you get last year? And they're like, 92. And I'm like, that's a big jump. Do you realize that? Like we got to figure out how we're going to close that gap in a few months. So I think if you're unsure of those numbers, making sure that you sit down and look at the data. I know that's going back a little bit.
The numbers are going to be smaller than people would have expected from years past because maybe. But as of right now, the signups are trailing. So it looks like those numbers may be tighter than they have been in the past.
I also wonder if the Open is just going to look different because you can qualify directly to the games, right? You can?
Yes.
Sorry.
To the games, you go to semifinals.
Yeah. But in the past few years, it's been 3 pretty, quote, CrossFit-y workouts with not a ton of high skill in them. Are they going to beef them up a little bit because there are higher stakes now? Before quarterfinals was the place where they raise the stakes, but are they going to do that in the Open? Are there going to be multiple scores? If there's a lift, is that going to change things dramatically for you?
It massively changes it for your percentile in the Open if there's a lift or not. So if you're a strong person, like even using myself as an example.
Or a weak person.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, it like heavily skews it. So hopefully it's in there because I think it makes it more rounded. I just think yeah, for sure. No, I mean, but for real though, I think if you're testing to go to 1% to have these subset of tests that are going to be very challenging, obviously, because now that you have that cut down even further, I think it's important to have that.
It definitely helps a weaker athlete to not see a strength test until the old quarterfinals, what would now be the online semifinals, because there are so many people. Like, let's just say if you're a male and you can't squat clean 315 and you're going to hit 305, there are so many people that can. And in the open, their score, just washes you straight down the leaderboard. But in a quarterfinals scenario, it's not as bad. Or in, this 1% scenario, it's not going to damage you as bad as it would in the open. So it really,
the placement of those tests makes a huge difference in who makes it through.
I think there's a balance of that. I think that maybe there was some choices. Those choices were based off of trying to encourage participation and not scare people away. But at the same time, the current audience loved that test. Like, they loved having strength being tested in the open, and were really disappointed when it wasn't there. So I don't know, maybe it'll change this year.
I mean, people need to be prepared for that there are plenty of people that are 99 percentile type athletes in the open, that if you go in and you say, okay, the third workout of the open is 3-minute Metcon into a max lift, that the combination of like, okay, well, now half the tests, because you have 2 scores there in your first 2 workouts, are like really power and heavy, that those 99 percentile athletes could be pushed way out of the top 1%. So people need to have expectations that like, okay, well, testing architecture really matters if now the cut line is only 1%. And then there'll be some athletes that like 1% is just a breeze. Like they're just going in through the open, doing their thrusters and laughing their way to the top 1%. So you do need to really kind of understand what this had done to change the open and where your current fitness is, because it should lead your preparation for the next kind of whatever it is now, a month.
I just looked 4 weeks.
4 weeks from
and
today.
Because it's so unknown right now, it is hard to set true expectations, I think. So maybe your expectations is more of not setting hard expectations and just being okay with this year being like, I'm just going to feel it out and figure out what this looks like now. And then maybe if it looks the same next year, you'll know what to expect. But there's just so much unknown this year.
I mean, also, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. No, you're good.
I was just going to say, it's really hard to set an expectation based on
a sport that changed again.
Other people's performance, right? So like, I want to be top 1%, but then you're tying your expectation to how many people sign up for the open, what the architecture of the workouts are, what the order of the workouts are. I think a lot of people fall into that trap, and I know that people hate this concept, but like tying yourself to a score on the leaderboard is probably not your best option if you're trying to set your expectations for something like this. Setting your expectations of like, I'm going to go out and have a plan for every workout. I'm going to go out, have my nutrition dialed in for every workout. I'm going to be as prepared for every workout as I possibly can. And I'm going to try to execute my plan to the best of my ability. And if I don't, then I'm going to plan on repeating it. There is your expectation set for the open that can set you up for success.
Yeah, it's like process expectations being really hard, but maybe outcome expectations, unless you are somebody who knows like you're the best in the world, or you're like, you want to be a games athlete, and you're, no matter what all of those decisions are, whether there's 4 tests or 3 tests or strength tests or no strength tests, you know that your capability is at the level to be amongst the best in the world. You can set your outcome targets no matter what the kind of unknown and unknowable situations are. But I don't think most people watching this video, or really most people are not in that situation.
Yeah, most people
it's
in
like,
the world.
It's 40 people maybe out of the potential 400,000 that might do it.
So there's one watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that leads well into what are the things you can do to improve your ability to reach success in the open. So to set those expectations that are performance based, not necessarily, outcome targets, but things that you can do to make sure your experience going in is like as optimal and as good as possible. And that kind of leads into like a lot of the things that we do in our training programs, making sure like you have conversations with coaches. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit. And I think it leads into a lot of like the nutrition, the recovery, and so forth. And the first is the throwdown, like something we generally do that we have in our programs year round is for those that get into the open to get into the art of competing. The throwdown is like the best opportunity that we create on a weekly basis to help with that.
Yeah. I don't remember what year it was that we created it.
19.
But yeah, I kept running into this issue that people were really good at training and intervals and hitting a number if we ran progressions, or getting better at thrusters and then getting better at muscle ups, getting better at a test retest. And then the open or any qualifier would come up and it's different. They haven't practiced. Well, I haven't practiced exactly doing, 150 deadlifts at this weight with this. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's a random sport. You can't always get the exact thing you want.
And setting up their cameras flusters them, and having a judge flusters them, and
yes, all this stuff. And so we created the Throwdown as an opportunity to practice that skill, which is not really something you'd really think of as like a sporting thing, is like, well, getting your camera set up and in frame and timing your warm up. And when you finish your warm up versus then having to walk around and be like, this is my plate. This is my other plate. Here's my plate on a scale. Here's my
road qualifier.
But that could take 20 minutes of time, and it messes with people's heads. It messes with people's warm ups. So we created this structure where it's like, okay, new workout, sometimes new standards, like we throw those types of things in it, different formats, different lane configurations, and doing that with like, okay, you get the announcement, you see a demo, now based on that, make a strategy, make a plan, and execute on it, is a skill in and of itself. So every week we instituted that into the program, and I'd encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I see that's super helpful with it, and this is kind of like a hard pill to swallow for some athletes, is using the Throwdown leaderboard as a gauge of where you're at on things that you feel confident in. So I have athletes that will do it and be like, if you're training by yourself and you're never comparing numbers, but you want to compete in sport, you have to face the realities of comparison sometimes, which shows you like directly where you're at against the field. And they'll feel really good in training about numbers, and then they do the Throwdown, and it's like humbling because they're like, oh, well, against this field, in our TT compete field, that wasn't very good. Yeah. And I'm like, cool, here's the harsh truth. You got to 10X that, because that's in the open, that's what it's going to look like, So I think it's helpful to face that sometimes, so you can kind of get a gut check on like, all right, I need to get myself in gear with this thing. Go ahead.
So I think part of this too, that's important to put out there, is that people are hearing do the Throwdown, and what they should be hearing is do the Throwdown with a judge, film the entire thing, have a plan before you go. And like Max said, review your plan after you're done and figure out where you made mistakes. And if you were going to repeat the workout, what you would do differently next time. And that for the next 4 weeks is like the number one thing that you could do to improve your performance in the open.
For sure. Repeating workouts is such a skill, and not just the actual act of repeating it, but the mental strain where you have those 2 to 3 days in between where you're recovering and you're thinking about the workout and you're seeing other people's scores and they're doing better than you and they're doing better than you and that person should never beat me, but they beat me. And you have to turn your energy away from those things and focus on what you can do in your repeat. And it's stressful. It's very hard.
I would add something that you didn't list is when I do a workout at max effort on the first time, it is almost at the limit of what's overwhelming me from a pain perspective. And I never finish a workout and I'm like, well, I just didn't try hard.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I just feel like I was beaten by a baseball bat. Somebody poured CO2 into my mouth and I can't breathe. It hurt.
So traumatic.
And then I wake up the next day sore and I'm like, oh, I got to do better than that.
Yeah.
So I think there's like the mental pressure that a lot of people face that aren't like you guys are. And I've been in that state where you're doing hard stuff like 5 days a week regularly to prepare for something. A lot of recreational competitors are not like that. So if you're dropping the hammer once a week or once a month, the exposure to it is very like, oh my God, I'm wrecked and now I got to do it again. That's a mental skill to just be like, okay, I can do it. I can handle it. So there's a lot of, I think, psychological and mental things that are at play for every level, the top level all the way down to just the like, I'm showing up into class on Friday Night Lights and I'm normally like in my corner working out. Now I got everyone watching me.
There aren't many people in the world that I've witnessed that are that good to show up and like perfectly execute super optimally that first attempt. They're like the elite, the highest of the highest level. They crush it. There's the people they usually have on the open announcement. And I'm like, they did really well. Maybe sometimes they'll redo it and do a little better. Yeah. But for the 99%.
Their fitness is just high enough that they're like 9 out of 10 execution is plenty.
And their experience level is high enough that they can look at a workout and say, this is where I'm going to get bottlenecked. This is how I'm going to have to break it. And they're right
Yeah.
Versus even when I look at a workout, I'm gonna break those muscle ups into 5, 4, 3, and then I'm doing threes.
Yeah. My point is for the rest of the world, the RX down to intermediate to beginner level gains so much from putting a lot of time into effort into preparing execution strategies and like consulting with someone to make sure that like you have a good plan going into it, because like just little changes. Like we had an athlete that's a member at the gym here go and do TFX this weekend in the intermediate category. And the workout opened with 50 wall balls and then went into like a chipper of like hang cleans and handstand push-ups. And just the little message she sent to Brandy, my wife, was like, hey, I'm thinking of going big on the wall ball. It's only like a 7-minute cat. And Brandy was like, just break it up very small. And she ended up getting second in the workout. Everyone else went big on the wall balls, blew up. So just like, that's not a fitness thing at all. That's just like self-awareness and little changes like that. And that's kind of a message to anyone that's newer in the sport or just doesn't think that maybe my fitness isn't where I want it to be. Like your execution and strategy going to these workouts makes such a massive impact.
That's why it's so important to, when you're doing you're practicing the throwdown for the next few weeks, write your strategy down beforehand and review it afterward, because that is where the learning occurs. If you just do the workout, it's going to take a lot of repetition to learn it. But if you write it down, do it, review it, you're going to learn it in the 4 weeks that you've got.
Video review is so powerful in not just in like skills and strength, but in watching yourself do a Metcon. It's crazy how much more you rest than you think you are. And by you, I mean me.
It's so humbling sometimes.
Yeah.
You're
So
like,
seeing that and honestly kind of like emotionally facing it, because it's not comfortable to watch. And then you have to be honest with yourself and say, I was lazy there. I was, I was looking for an opportunity to rest when I walked 10 feet away to grab that towel to wipe my forehead off. Like, stuff like that. But when you're in that level of pain and you're like emotionally stressed out, you might not even notice you're doing those things.
Yeah. And you think that's like all you can handle at that time.
Right.
And then you go back and you watch the 6-minute AMRAP you did and realize you rested 3 minutes of it.
Yeah. I think some of it too is awareness. Cause when you're really messed up, like I could have sworn sometimes I'm like, I took 3 breaths in between, and then you watch it and you're like, that was 25 seconds. That's exactly. Yeah. So the awareness and then the emotions you feel about like being frustrated with your past self then motivates you more. So it's a big part of the process. It's not the only part though. Like you don't want the next 5 weeks or 4 weeks of your training to be every day just practicing the art of competing, because you still need to get better at skills and train. And if you're a weaker athlete, like polish so your 1RMs feel as good as possible by the time it comes up. So there's also like the training component of it as well.
Yeah,
I don't know if I just jumped.
No, that goes into the next point, which is ensuring your training meets the demands of the sport that you're about to participate in. And I think that comes down to doing some research and paying attention to what are the volume requirements for some of these open workouts historically, take an average of them, and then make sure your training is reflecting that building in. I don't mean every day, but there's a progressive build into it, and like look at what the most popular movements are and make sure that I'm hitting those on a frequent basis to ensure that, all right, double unders, they come up all the time and like they're going to be in a very dense format. So make sure that at least a couple times a week they're getting in. And toe to bar, make sure that, if it's an average of 75 to 100, that you're doing sessions that have that amount of volume in them and you're building into it.
I learned this lesson last year for the 400th time.
Oh, I was like, what lesson have you learning 10 years in?
This one over and over and over. Yeah. I felt so prepared going into the Open. We'd been doing the group sessions and I'd been going hard with Mike and everybody. But we had done in those group sessions, because it was only Monday and Wednesday, we'd done no dumbbell snatches, no 50-pound dumbbell snatches. We'd done some heavy dumbbell snatches because it was more focused on.
Get you.
And then all of a sudden we're doing all those one arm, all the reps on the same arm, and I was like,
oh, and the snatch burpee. Yeah.
Yes, in 24.1, and I was like, I am not prepared for this at all. It went from I'm so confident and feel so good to I am so unprepared. Luckily, if you're following Compete or you have a coach, they're probably already doing this for you, making sure that a lot of this training volume is being addressed, because that's one of the things that we think about, like when we sit down to create Compete, is like, what are the traditional, what have we seen in the past historically? What kind of volumes have we seen for wall ball and dumbbell snatches and burpees? And we build a program to prepare for that.
Yeah. I also just little things like a movement checklist. Like it's very easy if you're doing just a traditional structure of like show up, do a class, it's easy to go through a week where you're like, oh, I didn't do chest to bars this week because there was toes to bar on Monday and there was muscle ups on a bar muscle up on a Friday that got pulled down to another skill. So you go through weeks of preparation into a thing without practicing the like movements that are in there. And I feel like there are just some center points that you have to hit to be ready for the volume. Like double unders is a big one. Being able to do burpees when you're super tired at speed, pulling off the ground, whether it's power cleans or deadlifts or snatches and super high reps while you're tired, all the gymnastics skills. And it's real easy to be like, oh, I went through a week and didn't touch this. So just having some sort of a movement checklist, even if it's not always at the volume threshold, that you're just getting exposure on a regular basis is important.
Yeah, and I think the elements of styles of tests too, meaning strength under fatigue, complex gymnastics under fatigue, because they're just continuously getting more designed where it's like a price of admission to get to that point to test those movements. And we do that in affiliate, we do that in TTT Compete. We make sure that, you know, like gyms that have members that are going to do the open, we make sure that we're building slowly into these progressive opportunities to, hey, you're going to test ring muscle ups or bar muscle ups under fatigue after doing, you know, 10 to 12 minutes of work, because that happens very often. Or you're going to build up to a tough lift after doing a long Metcon with really high turnover. We do that in a ton of Compete right now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like our strength theme right now currently is Mondays we do strength under fatigue work. Saturday we do it after the throwdown to get some percentage work in. So I think I feel really good about how everyone's going to feel coming into it pending something like that shows up. And if not, we check the boxes by rounding it together.
Yeah, that's actually the Monday strength session is something I kind of wanted to talk about the difference between training and competing. So like on game day, 3, 2, 1, go, 10-minute AMRAP of deadlift, burpees, workouts over, 7 minutes to build to a max clean. Like that's the format that you would get it. In that format, you might be getting 3 cleans because like the first 2 or 3 minutes afterwards, you're just surviving and changing your shoes and drinking water and putting a belt on. Then you're lifting something like 50%, 70%, 85, and then maybe 1 or 2 heavy lifts. And that's a skill to do that. It's like, it takes a lot to like brace when you're that tired and put yourself in the mindset, but you can't really do it in training all the time. So the structure of the strength work in a training format in preparation is like, okay, build to something that's like 75% in your warm up before the Metcon. Do the Metcon, and then instead of going right into it and testing to a 1RM, it's a little bit of a longer rest, but you're still building up to something relatively heavy afterwards, but just spaced out a little bit longer. Yep. So instead of doing it in 7 minutes, you're doing it in 15 minutes. Instead of only getting 3 lifts that are kind of moderate heavy or 2 lifts that are moderate heavy, you're getting 5 lifts. So your training allows you to do better on game day, but you do need like 1 time in the week or maybe 2 times in the week where you just like do the thing. Like, all right, you got to test it out. So there's this weird balance in our sport because it's so unknown of balancing those things out. And we put a lot of time into trying to just like get that balance right so that no matter what Castro decides, that you've had some preparatory balance in all of the things.
Yeah, and it is hard because you have good training principles where it's like, all right, don't train strength under fatigue. It doesn't make sense. Like there's too much interference. But that's not the sport. The sport mixes all that stuff together and makes it very chaotic. And there's this weird imbalance of movement patterns that when you write it on paper, it doesn't make sense, but we still got to do it anyway because we just know that's just the reality of the sport where it's like, wait, you have an AMRAP with 3 hinge movements. Like that makes no sense. Well, that's just open 25. That's 25.1. It's
sport you compete in.
It's deadlifts, power cleans, and dumbbell snatches. And you're like, what is going on? But yeah. So yeah. I think that's a good point. And I feel good that our programs do that well. And I feel like, I mean, personally too, following some of the progressions, that kind of strength volume, just like I feel very fit doing it. It's not hitting super high percentage Olympic lifts all the time, but it's like constantly working up to 80, 85% under fatigue. I feel very rounded.
Yeah. There's some good research on basically like how heavy a load feels on you based on fatigue can influence your physiological adaptation to it. So just adding the fatigue and doing it at a lighter percentage is it's not the same exact stimulus, but it's similar of a stimulus with 0 fatigue inputted because of how you perceive the loading and how your body deals with all of those stressors.
Yeah. What do you change coming into a season like this in terms of your eating, like nutrition wise? What are you doing with an intake of carbs, calories? Are you eating a lot more? Are you starting to tighten things up to try and lose weight? What changes do you do?
I usually start bringing carbs up because I usually take a pretty serious off season. So during the off season, I drop carbs down. I keep my protein high and my fats stay about the same. But then when I'm about 12 weeks out, Haley, who's my nutrition coach, usually starts to ramp things up because training also starts to ramp up about 12 weeks out. So that I think that's just sort of a necessary thing. If you're trying to compete and getting into that top 1% or moving on through the open is something that you're serious about, then having your nutrition dialed in so that you actually have the fuel to support the training volume. We were just talking about what the, historical training volumes. If you look at that distributed across a week, it's a lot of work, and you're going to have to make sure that you're properly fueled for that. And then you also, I think, need to have a fueling plan for the open workouts, especially if you're going to be repeating. If you end up having to repeat workouts, then you need to know exactly what am I going to eat beforehand. It probably shouldn't be any different than what you've eaten all the other times that you've done the throwdowns for the last 4 weeks. So you should be practicing that and planning that as you go. And then you do the workout. And then how are you going to recover so that 2 days from now, you can actually turn in an even better performance than you did the first time? And I think that's just as important as making sure you're hitting the preparatory volume, making sure that you're doing this skill of practicing competing, because doing all of those things that we just talked about underfueled, you don't get anything out of it.
Yeah. Personally, for me, it's like a psychological change going in when I'm able to, I'm really tight with my eating to stay pretty lean throughout the course of like the training block building in. And then when I get into kind of the comp phase, I just focus on eating enough, and I really take the restrictions off because it's a stressful time, and like I just want to like eat and do, give my gut what makes me feel good, and like lets me sleep well at night, like what lets me actually feel calm down when I'm going to bed at night. Whereas like previous training blocks leading in, I'm a little leaner. I'm trying to like kind of lose some weight leading in, so training helps. But I'm not saying that's the same advice for everyone, but little things like that make an impact where set yourself up for success so that you can focus, like eat to support the performance and not like the aesthetic goals that a lot of people pursue going in.
Also, if you're going to change the time of day that you're doing the open compared to when you normally train, you should probably start practicing that eating. So if you are doing Friday night lights, but you normally train at 8 a.m., that's a huge difference because you're used to training probably with very little in your stomach versus how early do you need to eat to not feel like you're going to barf during the open workout?
Well, and there's so many people who feel like they have to compete or train fasted or like with basically nothing in their stomach. And that's another thing that you need to practice potentially. Because if you're going to be doing the workout at night, you can't fast from noon until 7 p.m. and expect to put in good performance. Like anybody who's done significant amounts of fasted, high intensity training knows like you just don't perform to the same degree.
You're just flat.
You might think you're doing a good job, but then one time you show up fueled and you're like, oh, all those times I was doing it fasted, I was underperforming because I was underfueled.
That is so true. And that kind of goes in line with one thing we forgot to talk about with like committing when you do the open. We'll talk about like repeats and training volume being down. But yes, people fall for the misconception that like training fasted because it makes me feel good. Like, I'm very like clear-headed, my cognitive function's higher, that it somehow correlates to better performance, and it doesn't always. You have to face the numbers and say like, all right, look, I know during this time I'm committing during the open to like sleeping in, getting in an extra meal earlier than what I'm used to, and then going in, and maybe I feel slower in the morning for a few hours, but my power output for 7 to 12 minutes was insanely higher.
I would want to throw in a little bit of a different perspective on food for some people, because this, like, you're going to be fighting for the Masters games, team games. Like, you guys are at this threshold where, generally speaking, your body compositions are pretty optimized for the sport. And
thanks, Max.
And you're crushing output. So like your output is so high that you need the carbohydrates to fuel. There are people that are watching this, probably not at the elite level, but that your nutritional approach leading into the open might be like, hey, you got 10 or 15 extra pounds from, like, if right now you came to me and you're like, Max, you have to do the open, you got to do as good as possible. I know that I've gained 5 or 10 pounds of unnecessary body fat that if I were to take off and be potentially underfueled in training right now, by the time the Open came, I'd actually perform better by just not having 10 extra pounds to do burpees and toes to bar.
Yes,
well,
that's why a similar approach I take leading into these comps.
Yeah. So, and if you're a smaller athlete who is going to get pounded on a lift or pounded on barbell repeatability, eating extra potentially not good stuff and maybe putting on a little bit of body fat, feeling comfortable with your strength leading in might actually help you perform. So nutrition can also be something that should be relatively individualized. Now, if you're at the elite levels of a sport and you're in kind of elite shape, then like almost everybody, it's kind of the same thing. Like eat enough, get your carb intake up. Don't eat to be inflamed. Don't eat, like get good sleep, hydrate.
Yeah. Becky crushes it with like the TTT Nutrition Open Prep guides with this stuff. We usually send it out like a few weeks before.
Well, that's what I was going to say to Max's point. That's where there's so much value in having a nutrition coach who can actually help you make those decisions. Where to say, yeah, maybe you would benefit from reducing your body weight by 5 pounds between now and then, and they can come up with a plan to help you do that and still show up on game day fueled versus I'm just going to restrict everything and go in,
cyclic keto,
or
intermittent
calm you
fasting.
Calm you down when you're wayward with thoughts on like, oh my gosh, like I feel so weak, and it's like you're down 5 pounds on the lift. Yeah, you'll be okay, and that is still a 1% lift.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna be good.
You're fine.
Yeah.
So sorry to throw that in there.
Yeah,
you guys were talking about nutrition. I didn't want to exclude people that might just be in a different position because it's important if there's that much endurance work in there.
I think that highlights how important it is to have someone to help you with that.
Yeah. That's a good point. We were talking about like commitment, and that leads into repeats. If you want to do the best you can, and I'm not saying everyone that does the Open needs to go in with the intent of doing repeats, but if you have percentile pursuits, like you have to go in and prepare to redo the Open because it's highly competitive at that top level. Everyone wants that spot. And we provide a plan and compete on like each path that you're in under the assumption that you're going to repeat workouts. But what are some of the conversations you have year after year with people that aren't used to what that actually looks like?
So I've found that a lot of anxiety comes from lowered training volume, not just in something like the Open, but if there's a taper or a deload, it's really hard for most people in our sport to just mentally, emotionally accept that, which kind of like just like butts head with the concept of why we need a back off period. But during the Open, if you are bubble level at all,
bubble meaning like wherever the cut line is?
Correct. If you're trying to make it into a certain cut line, or if you want to take the Open very seriously in the sense that you want to rank as high as possible, then you have to repeat because there's so much that can be improved upon in a repeat. And it's not necessarily that Mike already touched on this, that you did something wrong, but you could have just come up with a better strategy after you learned it. And that strategy or that different way to approach a workout, you wouldn't have known that until you went through it. So the repeat is almost just inherent for most people that are at that level. But with a repeat, when you're doing a workout, most people do it on Friday and then you repeat on Monday, you have to recover in between, which means Saturday is not to crush yourself because you will not recover by Monday.
But my friends are throwing down.
Right. And you just have to be okay with that. And I know that that's hard and you'll have the thoughts of I'm losing strength. I'm not getting fitter. No, you're not getting fitter. That's not the point of competing. It's not to get better. We're testing right now. So you have to just totally switch your mindset where these next 3 weeks, my purpose is to rank as high as possible and nothing else matters when it comes to training progressions or anything like that. So you have to do what's necessary for you to recover in between that time. I'm a huge proponent of if you're going to compete, commit to competing. If you're doing the Open for fun and you just want to do Friday Night Lights or you one and done, there's totally nothing wrong with that. Yep. But if your goal is competitive and even it's just competitive against yourself, then you need to commit to it. And part of that is trying to hush the voices in your head that are telling you that you're not doing enough, because those voices will come up, but you can control them. You can say, no, I'm competing right now.
And I'm doing it because of this.
I also want to call bullshit on people because I know there are going to be a ton of people who tell me to my face the open doesn't matter. I get a top 1% no matter what, or I'm just doing it for a score.
I know what's coming here.
They do the workout. And then I write training the next week, and they're like, I redid the workout. And
I felt good Monday, so I came in and gave it another go.
And they end up redoing every workout. Yeah. So, like, if you're competitive and you're doing it, just plan that you're going to repeat a lot, even if you don't have to. Like, the ego of a competitor is such that you don't want to know that you got another round in the tank because you messed up your double unders, and you're just going to sit there and watch your name fall thousands of places down the leaderboard, even if it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so, I love it. It's the first question I ask when I read that comment come in. All right, who beat you? Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Everybody's comfortable with not repeating and like saying it until they see where they're at on the leaderboard. Yeah. And as soon as they see it, they're like, "That was shit. I have to do it again."
Yeah,
it's consuming because you're like, you also do the comparison game of like, well, 2 more reps is that many spots. I'll just do it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to collect those free points.
Yes. So just accept it. Don't tell your coach you're not going to do it.
I'll admit, I mean, this is a personal testament is like, I didn't pursue masters last year because I just wanted to do the open and just let that be it for the season. And to me, the art of repeating is super fun. Like, I liked the challenge of each week doing the workout and then putting together a plan and seeing how much better I can do. Now, granted, that was a very easy process because I did it on Thursdays right when the workout came out. So like, I always sucked.
You were the sacrificial lamb.
But like, to me, it's just super fun knowing like I got the 3 weeks done and did the absolute best I could. And it just like walking away from that, like, felt really good.
Yeah.
Yes, I still looked at the leaderboard and was like, However, like that, I wasn't like pursuing a next stage or anything. It was just for fun.
Yeah.
Chris.
And the skill of repeating will apply to people who are doing all these qualifiers too, right?
Yeah. Should I repeat what you just said?
Yes.
Yeah. Chris said, and the skill of repeating would just be something that could be applicable outside of just your score in the open, which is true. It's similar, like doing the throwdown as a skill of competing. Repeating is a similar, I think, skill within that competition architecture.
One that's probably important to practice if you're going to be in that top 1% or 2% for masters and you have to do an online semifinal. The reality is, if you want to qualify for the next stage from there, you're going to be repeating. Yes. Even if it's in a 3-day window and you have 6 workouts, you're going to be repeating 1 or 2 of those unless you are the best of the best. And if you're listening to this podcast,
you're probably not.
Probably not you.
All right. So with that said, that's a lot of racing. That's a lot of comparison. It's a lot on the brain and the body. What do you do? It's 3 weeks long. And like by the 3rd week, people are just like, they're drained. Yeah. So what are we doing to kind of follow our company ethos of making sure this is something long-term, sustainable? What are the recovery, the methods that we're putting in between these efforts to make sure that it's something that we can continue to do, and then we're looking more long-term than just like, this is the only time we'll compete ever.
Yeah.
I tell people to stay off the leaderboard. I think that's one of the best things you can do to keep yourself so that you're not burned out by the 3rd week is to stay off the leaderboard. So you're not constantly like, who beat me? And we just talked about this at length, but I think that reduces people's stress levels and lets them disconnect from the competition. The other thing I've told people in the past is, okay, let's say you do the workout on
back to the leaderboard thing. When you say stay off, you mean just don't
go look at the leaderboard all the time. In fact,
yes,
if you have a coach, have your coach check and just be like, yeah, you're good. You don't need to repeat.
Yeah, and check after the submission or something.
Yeah,
when you said stay off the leaderboard, not like don't put your name on the leaderboard.
No, not. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification.
I think let us too, like as a team, we come together as soon as we can to learn the numbers and put together data, and we send it out to say like, hey, if you're around here, you're good. If you're not, you need to consider redoing, or you need to redo, and like let us make those decisions. I think that's super helpful for athletes instead of them. Athletes, man, they're like, they'll crush a workout and be like, are you really sure? I'm like, it's 25 percentile. Like you're going to get 1% in that workout. Like, you're good.
Yeah.
Like let it go and move on.
I think the other thing is to tell people to, when they get done with the workout, go do something other than be in the gym constantly.
Go look at the sky.
Yeah. Go outside and it's starting to get nice, at least here around that time. Go for a short hike, go for a 2-mile hike. If that's going to compromise your recovery between that and a repeat, then you have much bigger problems than qualifying for the next stage.
Yeah, I was going to lean on, I know no one cares about the super basic fundamentals, but I feel like it really is like eat, hydrate, sleep, be with people you care about, get outside and get some sun, screens. Get off screens. Don't think about the competition. Don't beat yourself up and compare. And there's going to be some of it no matter what, but if you moderate all of those other things down, by week 3, you should have outperformed like 85% of the field, because 85% of the field is anxious, redoing workouts, over enthusiastic in week 1. Like they're making so many mistakes that like the war of attrition, even in a 3-week competition, means that if you just took care of yourself moderately well, by week 3, you're probably outperforming a lot of people.
I mean, you don't need to go do cryotherapy, be in the Normatec boots immediately after, doing electrostim. And
I'm not against any of that. I just don't. I think the other things make a bigger difference.
Because here's the reality: is most of the people that are going to go do that aren't taking care of their nutrition and the hydration and the sleep and taking a nap and touching grass and all of that stuff that they should be doing.
Yeah,
that will actually help. Recover.
And like ice baths as an example, like if you look at an elite athlete, like if you look at, I don't know if we have exact measurements, but if you took like Travis's core temperature in the middle of a 20-minute AMRAP where he lapped an average person by 4 rounds or 5 rounds, like the amount of work he did and the amount of heat he put into his body, his recovery strategies, which might be kind of extreme relative to a normal person, might be more optimized to what he's doing. A regular person, it's like you worked out, you got like up to 85, 90% of your max heart rate, you got your muscles really tired. You don't need to go to the extremes. You just need to not make it worse. Like you need to not go out and have 8 beers that night so you're dehydrated and don't recover, and need to come in on Saturday and do another 4
Unless you're celebrating
Metcons.
Friday Night Lights and you're one and done,
I guess,
and you're having fun.
I guess, yeah.
The
It's
open
different.
falls on Patty's Day.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, but they're not repeating on Monday.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing too is, look, sometimes the workouts don't go as planned, and that goes in with how it makes the Open very stressful. Give yourself a finite time to get over it. So give yourself 10 minutes to get over it, sulk, pout, be pissed, throw shit, whatever you got to do. But get over it in 10 minutes. Just set a timer, whatever. Then immediately start building your plan to learn from it. Because if you just carry it with you the rest of the weekend, but you're not being productive or you're not taking action on it, then it will drain you and wear you out, and it's going to eat into your ability to recover. So I think get to work right away on trying to get over it, and then quickly build a plan so that you can just kind of know, all right, I've taken control of this. I screwed up, or I didn't execute. I underperformed based on the expectations I had. And this allows you to know to have some power back and kind of put it to bed so you can focus on the rest of the weekend, go home, be with your family, your friends, whatever. And it allows you to just let it go.
Yeah, it's like controlling your own narrative and tying back to your original goals that you laid out for the Open.
I think it's also helpful. I do this particularly when I'm really disappointed in a performance of mine. Well, yeah, I do that first. But after that,
I do this a lot.
That usually doesn't make me feel much better, is I'll write down the things that I can do moving forward to not make those mistakes again or have those underperformances again. And in something like the Open, you're going to write those things down, but you're not going to go the next day and do them. You're going to put them away, send them to your coach, and review all of it at the end of the Open. But I do think it's helpful it makes me feel like I have some control in it moving forward, and it's not something that's just going to continue to become a problem. It was exposed. Think about it. How can I improve it? All right, put it away, focus on the next task, and then I'll review all that with my coach once the competition is over.
Yeah, those are good points. And I think this leads into
and I also cry.
Oh, hey, if you got to cry,
and don't feel better about
it. Yep, nothing wrong with that. I feel like that kind of leads into, having a support crew and making sure that you have people in your corner that can, call you out on your BS. Like if you had goals and expectations and you said you're going to do all these things and you're not following up on that, like having people around you that you trust that, will be honest and hold you accountable to that. Or if you're just not sure and you kind of like fall into these tendencies and these negative loops of just making the same mistakes over and over again, having someone to, kind of put it on them to say, hey, like, can you review this? Like, let me know what I need to fix. I'm kind of unsure here. Having a coach in your corner or getting on to compete and relying on the several coaches that are in there answering questions throughout the entire Open, I think is super helpful and makes that experience and that process much better. Like you don't have to go at it alone.
I do think support in every capacity is necessary. And like we try to support from a distance with a lot of our athletes, But I think there's also a layer to in-person support during these things. If you got to show up to a gym and the gym is super crowded with class and you don't have space blocked out and you don't have somebody helping with judging, and it's going to make it really hard to perform. So you got a month now of planning. Find accountability partner, do the throwdowns with somebody that can help judge you, find somebody in person that can help you maybe review your videos, start to establish a relationship with us in the water cooler that you could feel more comfortable asking questions during the open. So like cultivate your support structure is maybe what I would add to that.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm going to sign up, and I'm pumped to give it a go for some repeats this year, because I want to chase after that 2%.
Are you doing the Thursday demo thing again this year?
No, I'm not going to demo. No.
I'm not doing it either. Don't look at me.
We have some ideas. We have
some commitments.
We have the ideas of having an elite demo. Like,
this would be a cool thing for people to comment on what they'd want to see.
What demos would you like to see? Let us know in the comments in terms of what like division of athlete do you want to see?
Elite,
high level,
masters, high level, bubble level, intermediate,
washed up masters.
Washed up.
Yep.
You are not a washed up
baby
masters.
No longer. I'm not a baby masters anymore. I'm about to.
Once
I'm
you go 1 year past it, you go from prime masters
40
to
next
washed
year,
up.
or do you have 2 years?
I'm 38.
38, so you have 2 years.
Are you 40 this year?
Oh, yeah.
So you're in the next division this year? Oh, baby.
Oh man, that's so wild.
The question. Instead of saying, what do you want to see? Say, what would you actually click on, you stupid?
Okay. I'm going to ask this question differently. What would you actually click on, you wonderful podcast audience? No, but for real, what types of videos would you click on and watch and be helpful to you? Because if we're going to take all the time to do it, we want to make sure that we're not like, oh, here's Travis doing a workout, and people are like, that's too fast and I don't care. Or they want to see that and they don't really care about seeing somebody at their level. So if you have thoughts, share them.
I get this comment all the time from doing the demos, and I mean, I think I appreciate it, but it's like, man, you're a similar athlete to me. I loved watching your strategy on that.
It's great to see a regular person out there.
Because I blow up in like long AMRAPs, and they're like, yeah, that's what I would do. Thanks. And I'm like, all right, appreciate that. Glad to go first.
Yep.
The trap with someone like Travis is I would watch Travis be like, oh, yeah, that's how I'm going to do it. And then you get out there and you're 2 rounds in, you're like, this was
it just makes sense.
That's a trap with every live announcement.
Yep.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it looks so easy. Like, oh, just do it unbroken and you'll go faster. Like,
or even like, he did it unbroken, I'll break it once. Like, no.
Yeah,
you got to break it 4 times. That's equivalent.
My rule of thumb in most open workouts is never do anything bigger than a set of 5. It usually pays off pretty well for me.
Do you double unders like that?
I mean, it could probably still work. Yeah.
No, it probably does.
That's not real advice. I'm just kidding. All right. Thank y'all for listening.
Is that the end? That was our last point?
Yep.
Sweet. All right.
Bye.
See ya.